Hello, everybody, and welcome to PESA Presents. Today, we're going to be looking at something rather special, a little peek into the history of the wonderful state of Alaska with a look into their various gold rush phases. Now, many people talk about California's gold rush and what happened over there, but there's not that much that's been really said as much about Alaska's comparatively. So, let's look into that a little bit, shall we? Now, our relationship with gold is probably more complicated than any other metal. I mean, throughout history, its allure, its draw has been something that has been cross cultural throughout time periods, ages, cultures. It's just something that we cannot get our hands off of, definitely. So it's something that's always going to draw us. And that's irregardless of however it's mined, whether it be like placer mining, open pit mining, no matter how high tech or quote unquote low tech you go, that draw is always going to be there. Now, here is a couple of people experiencing said draw. This was from Nome, Alaska in 1910. Now, the town of Nome actually grew up pretty quickly, so to speak, from one of these gold rush phases, and we're going to look into how pretty shortly, Nome being one of the three areas that we're going to look into. Now, some of these phases did not go about very well with some of these people, as you can see here. Granted, this is an illustration, but still, a lot of people, this did not go very well. Folks came out, they staked everything on making it big. And yes, this was a very dangerous undertaking. And yes, you could argue this should have been common sense. But still, a lot of these people, they did have the best of intentions. And you have to think good of them in that situation. And they did not always do the best. And so a lot of people did not end up very well with this situation. And it turned out to be a pretty, pretty bleak spot for quite a few people. Now, I mean, here's a folk that's prospecting off of actually Nome Beach during this period, and obviously he's just by himself, and a lot of people did wind up by themselves during this. For the amount of people that just wound up coming out here, the vast, vast majority wound up going back directly home. It was very hard to make a living out here, and even harder to sustain that as well. Now, while this was not directly a gold mine, when I first started looking into this and contacting people in Alaska, well, what can I focus in? What can I look into? Vast majority of folks said you have to mention the Kennecott mines. So we're going to mention those a little bit later and how they relate to this whole situation, but I just find it really neat how they tie into things. And while yes, gold has been found in their general area, they weren't exactly a gold mine per se. They're still extremely beautiful and very, very important part of the absolutely just rich heritage of this entire area. Now, this whole entire time has been compared to a lot of things. One thing the historians have compared it to is the whole entire situation with the Oregon Trail. Except one book that I was looking at, the one guy compared it to the Oregon, he said, how did he phrase it? The Oregon Trail, except even worse and a lot more uphill. And not to disparage what happened with the other people, but you have to kind of think of yes, you're crossing mountains still, but also you're doing it when it's absolutely just bitter cold, a lot worse climatic conditions. And so, yeah, and while the Oregon Trail does not bring up the best of comparisons for people my age for obvious reasons, still, let's just go back a little bit in time. Or, okay, perhaps not. Let's not go back too far, but let's just go back to the late 1800s in Alaska. This is an actual abandoned mine shaft from the period, right by the way, and we'll just look into a little bit of these gold rush periods and kind of how some of this happened. Some of these stories get to be actually pretty funny. I mean, we're looking into bar fights in a tent, people getting possibly like just, oh my god, some of these things actually get really neat. We'll see. So now, first of all, gold itself is, of course, an element. Atomic number 79. Now, going to go look into some of its characteristics right here. So it does have an isometric crystal system, hardness of 2.5 to 3, specific gravity of 15 to 19.3. So obviously, it's not a very hard metal. And that's one of the problems with prospecting it, of course. You have to be very, very careful because it's notoriously extremely soft. Now, the word gold itself is of unknown derivation and dates to about the year 725. It's often called aurum in classical texts, which is where we get the AU from. Now, gold itself was used for decorative objects by 4500 to 4000 BCE. Now, by meaning it was probably used earlier. That's the dates that we know for sure. Same thing by coins. So, African and Middle Eastern empires began using it in coins by 550 BCE. The actual date was probably much, much earlier and is something that archaeologists and geologists really like to argue about, but it's by about 550 BCE. Now, the oldest mine is it's kind of in between. It depends on whether or not you want to go like completely above ground or more so below ground. You're looking at the Varna Acropolis, which is a little bit of both worlds. So that's 4700 to 4200 BCE. That's in Bulgaria. Or the Sakdrizi in Georgia, which is the 3rd to 4th millennium BCE. Now, so the three areas that we're going to look into are Fairbanks, Klondike, which, yes, was found, the gold there was found in Canada, but because a lot of the people passed through Alaska on their way there, that's why it's included in a lot of the texts, and also Nome as well. So here we're looking at a map of the Yukon gold fields of the Alaskan Klondike region. Now yes, that's a really big map, and obviously it's covering the United States, so still, it gives you a general idea of just really people forget how big Alaska is. And I know that sounds cliche, but people really do. They forget how big Alaska is. Now, this is a little bit of the Klondike Gold Rush National Historical Park. Very sweet people. If you go on any of their social media, they're really great about answering questions and other things. Right up there, that's an actual picture of just all over the grounds of the park in other places. There's abandoned just bits and bobs of things that people left all over because folks coming up there just trying to meet their, make their due and everything. They're dropping stuff by the side of the road because there's only so much you can carry. And when you're trying to go up there and you're going uphill, like, say, people making this cross across the country back in the day with, say, the Oregon Trail, when you're trying to go up the Rocky Mountains, you can only cross like so much high and so much weight. So people are trying to lessen the weight along the way, and they would find like dumps of goods along the way. It's the same thing here. Archaeologists have found like in the insane amounts of everything from canned goods to other deals in various parts in Alaska. So in 1896, gold is found in Canada's Yukon, but by whom? So the credit was given to a Caucasian individual, but most likely it was actually found by an indigenous individual. Problem being, actually, at the time, as ludicrous as it sounds, indigenous persons were not qualified to file a claim in Alaska. So this other person was involved. It was actually a group of three, two indigenous, and then this other person, and he wound up filing the claim. Now, over 100,000 miners actually made the journey to the Klondike. It got to be this big thing where it was called Klondikeitis. So many people wanted to get over there to get this goal, but really only 30 to 40,000 just physically made it to Alaska because the journey was so hard. Now, part of it was that the Canadian government legally required them to bring provisions. Some of that was them kind of pointing their fingers at other things like, yeah, we saw what happened to you guys down in the United States when you tried to cross over into Oregon and this place and that place earlier. So you have to bring X amount of provisions, you have to bring this, you have to bring that. And some people physically, A, just couldn't carry that much, and B, just couldn't afford it. And also, too, it was hard crossing around there because a lot of folks going overland into Alaska was a very, very difficult option. But then going around it coastally was difficult too. I mean, there's no one easy way to do this, let's face it. And great, great hardship for very little reward. And so, for as famous as the Klondike Gold Rush is, it was a very, very kind of like a quick thing, and very few people were remaining up there by 1899, in part too because a lot of other folks got distracted by the bright lights of some other things that later happened. So now this one gets to be interesting. So there are these three guys, Eric Lindbaum, Japhet Lindenberg, and if I'm mispronouncing that, Swedish folks, I'm so sorry. I'm Pennsylvania German, forgive me. And then there's a Jan Björtensen. Now, there's these guys, they were called the Three Lucky Swedes. Only two of them were actually Swedish, one wasn't. But so in 1898, they all got together in Alaska. They happened to come there. Lindblom was actually there by a kind of by accident. The legend goes that he either got drunk and like accidentally signed up on a ship, or he got shanghaied and found his way on a ship, which is a very 1898 thing to happen. But but so he found his way onto a ship, and then eventually he found his way with these other two guys, and the three of them are like, hey, let's go looking for gold. And they actually did really good, like really, really freaking good. And they started to form all of these claims, but they didn't make these claims properly. And they realized this, and they're just, oh crap, we need to actually do this right. So they wound up finding this guy that was a mining lawyer, and this guy that was the mining lawyer got the other necessary witnesses. So it was a group of 6 people all together. And October 15th of 1898, their party of 6 organized what was called at the time the Cape Nome Mining District. And within 5 days, and with just literally 2 pieces of equipment, these guys are getting 20 ounces of placer gold a day. So you're looking at $20 an ounce, 20 ounces of gold a day. Just do the math. And this is the money in 1898. So these guys were pulling out mad amounts of money. But of course, I mean, there's 6 people that are doing all this. They're going to the bank back and forth. The story leaked out pretty quickly. Now, eventually, 1 in 3 men in Nome in July of 1899 was completely destitute from a prior gold rush. In other words, the Klondike one. So these guys started to hear about what was happening, and they started going up to this area trying to, well, these 3 guys are doing it so good, so let's get some of this money for themselves. And things did not really go as well. It's kind of hard to see what's going on here, but if you kind of look almost like at the 9 o'clock position on your left, you can see just that's people. I mean, it almost looks like a group of like insects swarming together, but that's a massive group of people, and they're waiting for the news for all the ships coming in and out. All these people saying, well, did John Smith find any gold here, or did Harry Jones find any gold over here? And that was how they all got their news. And then they would all go running over there and everything. And, well, yes, people would try to stake claims. There was a lot what was called claim jumping, which was basically institutionalized blackmailing, was what it is, to put things politely. So basically, you were to find a claim. You were to find a piece of land that had some gold, and you were to stake your claim. Now, in Alaska, that involved a procedure that involved several witnesses, legality, a mining attorney, and several other things. Some people did that legally, others did not do that legally. But still, all the same, what a lot of folks did was this claim jumping, where they then would get a hold of, say, a crooked politician or somebody else in the area, and they would then make a claim on top of a prior claim and kind of strong arm the person that held the original claim and be, hey, if you don't give me X amount of money, I'll keep holding on to your land. And that was what happened with a couple of the people over here. And that was what happened, or at least what people tried to happen, to the three guys from earlier. So, July 10th of 1899, a meeting is called in the tent of the Northern Saloon, which I'm not making that up. That is, yeah, that's insane. They held their saloon inside of a tent, but needs must. And so all of these guys were getting very, very disgruntled because these miners, well, these people had come up in droves and they had spent a lot of money. And yes, I said that you must think positive of them, but still, all the same, a lot of people had come up there and they had risked a lot trying to get up to there. And then there are these three guys that they come up there, and heck, one of them was half drunk when he did it. And they're telling all these stories about it. I mean, he didn't even hide that story. He was kind of half proud of it, for God's sake. And so they were jealous and they were angry, and there was a bit of ethnic hatred involved. Like, well, why are these guys over from, places that aren't even around here? Like, why are they getting all this money and we aren't? So they had started this thing where they were basically going to just declare as a group. They were basically going to sort of declare on their own behalf, martial law kind of, and say, okay, at X time, everybody's claim is null and void. And then they were to all then reclaim all of these other guys' claims for themselves. But the U.S. Army found out about it and they were like, no, honey, no, no. And so that put the kibosh on that. And fortunately, just when this rioting was really starting to get bad again, they discovered that the literal beach that they were all camping on, there was actually gold underneath them. And that was great because you didn't need a claim to then get the gold under that beach. So then people kept then going back and they were at least getting the gold out underneath that beach. Now, very, very quickly then, overnight, in between all of this, Nome became a town of over 10,000 people. All the same, most miners were gone by 1909. I mean, you can't have a candle lit at both ends for very long, you can't have something going full speed for very long. So this didn't take a lot. There wasn't that much for people to do, but still it was pretty good while it lasted. Now, women weren't often miners. Problem being was that if a claim was needed, few were allowed to make that claim because, well, again, they were women. Now, the same went for people of certain ethnic or racial backgrounds, like if you were to say be a person of color, or earlier mentioned Indigenous persons were also not allowed to make claims. Yes, it depended upon the area, but if you were a certain person of a certain class, you may have had extreme difficulties of making a claim, which is why many people liked or preferred the Nome Gold Rush when they came up to there. They just found that it was a lot easier for folks because you didn't need a claim to go out and to work all that sand. Now, this here is a geologic map of the Fairbanks district, so we're going to go look into this one now. So this happened a little bit later. There was a guy named Felix Pedro, so he found gold in central Alaska via two different kinds of deposits, placer and lode. So, and the same thing, if you guys ever, something like this ever happens, just keep your mouth shut, seriously. So, prospectors finding ill luck in Nome, rerouted, and then eventually the region shows about 15.4 million ounces found. Now that's altogether, like total, but still. So in the 1920s, this company wound up taking over. By 1928 to 1965, they had found 4.2 million ounces of gold. And then in 1996, they're now in charge of the Fort Knox mine, which has become Alaska's top producer of gold. That is actually their MnDOT page right there. And independent miners still operate in this area. And then in the general vicinity is the Wrangell St. Elias National Park, which those are actually glaciers right there. I know those look like roads, but those are glaciers. So a lot of that area is now protected, fortunately, so we can rejoice in that. And that brings us on to the Kennecott, also spelled the Kennecott Mines. So now the differencing in the typo is supposedly because of the one guy that was kind of writing things out. I don't know, there's a bunch of different opinions as to how that name came about. So basically the story is that back during when a lot of this mineral exploration, because there was a lot of copper rushes too up during this time as well, and other metals as well, there were a bunch of guys that were looking up on the hill and they were just, uh, why is that hill green? And this is Alaska and it's this time of year. Well, they weren't looking at grass. Here it turns out that they were looking at malachite. They were looking at so much malachite that it was basically covering the hill and making it look green. So they wound up going up there. And like I said earlier, while the Kennecott mines, the whole region is mostly known for its copper. I mean, if you look at the MnDOT pages for the various mines, it's all copper mineral, copper mineral, copper mineral. They did possess some gold ore. It's a wonderful place to visit. I've run into a few people online now that have been there. They absolutely love it. Seriously, the National Park Service people there are absolute sweethearts. Now, the Jumbo and Motherlode mines there produced quality copper and silver as well. And obviously, both relative, I mean, they're related. They're found often in tandem with gold, so it's something that's comes up. Now, something that sadly does come up a lot in situations like this is oftentimes when one person gets ahead, another person gets the short end of the stick. And here you see a tent city out when all of this was going on during the Nome Gold Rush. Now, one sad thing that happened during all this, well, a couple of sad things were obviously said earlier, the Indigenous were not allowed to file their own claims. They knew that this gold was here for quite some time, but not being able to file their own claims, it kind of, they couldn't defend their own property. They couldn't do any of that. And so these people came in and they took their own ancestral lands, they took their own ancestral metals and all these other things that they had. Also, too, things like, say, the salmon migration was affected for decades afterwards, and other things, the caribou. People hunted the animals that the indigenous population survived upon. So, not only did the indigenous greatly suffer because of this, but also did the local wildlife. So, while this is something, things like gold rushes are romanticized in, say, TV, movies, reality shows, God help us, they did have a very dark aspect to them. So just, keep that in mind all the same. But still, I don't know. It's a complex part of our history as not only a country, but really as a people. And all the same, thank you very much for joining us right now. And take care and have a wonderful rest of your